And when I woke up this morning, I was feeling pretty dangerous.
And if we're talking tight ends and we're going into round 2, maybe round 3, give me Ian Thomas, please. Let's just do the damn thing.
Just based on giving his overall ability. Again, I like his arm. I think he can make every throw.
The pick at number 12 is in.
Welcome to Cover One, the NFL Draft Podcast. I am Russell Brown, and joining me, as always, on a Tuesday night, CP Christian Page, my man, the Auburn alum himself in the Final Four for the very first time. Congratulations, my friend.
Thank you, and congratulations to Sparty as well.
Thank you. I cannot believe we took down Zion and the Duke Blue Devils. And as I was writing out our preview on the Cover One page and putting together our post for the podcast, I was saying, give us just 5 minutes, folks, just 5 minutes of your time for Final Four talk, and then we'll get into 2019 NFL Draft prospects and everything else. But I think we have to talk about our teams being in the Final Four. I mean, what were you thinking when they were playing not just New Mexico State? They were playing Kansas, who they beat. You had North Carolina. You had Kentucky. 3 very solid teams when we get into this part of the season. They're solid all year long. And Kansas is known to choke, but normally Kentucky, UNC, 2 teams that are normally in this Final Four picture, you guys knocked all 3 of them out. What were you thinking during that game against North Carolina or against Kentucky?
Yeah, well, I'll get to that in a second, but just going back to the route, the finish to the New Mexico State game, you want to say Auburn should have lost that game? You definitely can. There's definitely a lot of evidence there that Auburn would not have won that game, and that meant all 12 seeds would have advanced to the round of 32 because Auburn was the only 5 seed to survive among the other 4 5s or among the other 3 5 seeds. But, yeah, going down to Kansas, Auburn just blew them out in the first half. I mean, it was the 3-ball. Bill Self, I don't know if he didn't do a scouting report on Auburn's team at all, but Auburn likes to play fast. They like to shoot the 3, and they like to lock you down on defense. Kansas had no answer for all of that. North Carolina, another team that really likes to run, and Auburn outran them. Auburn outplayed them, which is really hard to say by a Roy Williams coach team, but that was the case. But the Kentucky game, Auburn was down by 10 points in the first half. They make a little comeback going into halftime. And then there was just a lot of grit. And I know a lot of times, you want to talk about, especially when you're playing a team like Kentucky and Duke, like Michigan State was doing, mentality is one thing, but it's hard to match it to that talent because I think you sometimes can make the case that talent not necessarily trumps all, but it trumps about 75% of it. But that didn't faze Auburn whatsoever. Bryce Brown was huge.
Yes.
Jared Harper was huge down the stretch. Those 2 guys combined for 50 points. And, Auburn was without, in my opinion, their best player in Chuma Okeke, who's a borderline first-round draft pick until he tore his ACL against North Carolina. But this Auburn team, to this point, do they match up well versus Virginia? Not really. Virginia's the slowest-paced team in basketball. Auburn likes to run the floor. They like to shoot a lot of threes. But this case, I can't say Auburn can't beat anybody because they beat Kansas, Carolina, and Kentucky. Only one other team in the past has done that in the NCAA tournament. It was the national champions, Arizona Wildcats in 97. So Auburn has a really good omen going forward.
Well, and I'll tell you, I think part of it too is Virginia is very much like Duke in the sense that they've been playing a lot of close games in this tournament. And if there's a time for them to lose, probably should have been against Purdue, but realistically, it could be here because, like you just said, they're a slower-paced team, pretty good defensive team. But when you got a team that is fast up the floor that can shoot those threes, it has a tendency to work for teams. Now, if Auburn misses, like Michigan did against Texas Tech where they were 1 for 19.
Oh, awful.
Yeah, exactly. If they're not hitting their shots, obviously you're going to lose the game. But if you can keep the game close, you create some turnovers, and you've got that ability to get those fast break buckets and shoot those threes, it's going to work out for you. And that's exactly what Michigan State did against Duke. They created turnovers. They won that battle. They had 15 points, maybe even by the time the game ended, 18 or 19 points off of fast break points, where Duke and Zion, they had 0 through the entire game, which was incredible. I don't think that's ever happened for Duke, maybe ever. So, I'm in the same boat as you. Both teams just grind this out and showed their grit and showed their ability. Like, obviously, I've seen State in the Final Four. I've seen them win a title. I know what it feels like, but it's been so long. Like, Izzo getting to Final Fours is great, but him being 1-11 against Mike Krzyzewski and Coach K and against Duke and, like, just all of that, and then just going out and, like, he didn't even believe he won. He couldn't believe it at the end. He was like, are you kidding me? So, like, I wish you the best of luck against Virginia. I mean, like, I think this is going to be a very fun Final Four on Saturday. I'm predicting Michigan State versus Virginia. That's what I'm predicting. So,
that's how the cards should line up. Let's just hope Michigan State or Auburn makes the final, because if we see a Texas Tech and Virginia game, I don't want a 35-33 final.
It seriously would be like that. Obviously, you're leaning towards Auburn winning. Do you have a score prediction for that game?
For the Auburn-Virginia game?
Yeah.
I think it might be a little lower scoring, but it's hard to really doubt this Auburn team. I mean, they scored 78 against New Mexico State, 89 versus Kansas, 97 versus North Carolina, a very sound defensive team. And they score 77 points, lower pace game against Kentucky. But I think Auburn's defense is the big key in this game. And if they can find ways to get somewhat of an 8-10 lead at some point in the game versus Virginia, that might just be enough for Auburn to kind of cruise to victory. So, I mean, I would think it would be something very similar to the Kentucky final score. So maybe like a 75-70 game. But I think, again, if Auburn kind of makes a gap some point in the game, that might be too big of a deficit for Virginia to overcome, just based on how limited they are, based on their pace of play and the lack of possessions.
Yeah, I'm just going with my gut. I think Auburn is a team that could win. I would like to see them win. I would love to have next week on the show. Maybe we could pull out a Monday show if possible. I don't know, though, because, it's always tough, but because that's when they would play. But definitely that Tuesday show would be a very interesting one, to say the least. But I would like to see Auburn win, but my gut is saying Virginia's going to win. So, like, that's what I'm picturing. But I'm wrong a lot. So let's get into prospects and where we can be maybe even more wrong, and let's see if we have some differences here. We're keeping it simple, and I would love, actually, for those that listen, I would love for them, not only when they subscribe to the Cover One NFL Draft podcast on iTunes or on Google Play, however you go about your business, I want you to leave some comments or reach out to us on Twitter @_Christian Page, @Russ NFL Draft, and give us 3 or 4, maybe even 5 of your favorite players in this class, and maybe just a little bit onto why. I would love to hear some of the feedback that we're getting on people's favorite prospects, because we're not the only people watching these players, of course. But let's start at the very top. Who's one of your favorite players in this class?
It's a guy that's been catching a lot of buzz lately from reports from Pauline Brugler, Matt Miller, that Sean Bunting, the Central Michigan cornerback, could be a potential top 40, top 50 pick. And I know this is the time of year in the draft season where it's a lot of smoke and mirrors. What do you believe? But when 3 reputable sources tell you that, it's probably pretty much all but done, because Bunting is just a guy that really pops off the film. He's very physical, and I really like him in a press scheme. He can kind of over pursue at times at the line of scrimmage, but he has enough recovery ability where even if he does over pursue on his punch or his jab at the line of scrimmage, he has enough recovery ability, enough lower body fluidity to get back on track. And he's a guy, one of my favorite qualities, and I'm going to talk about it with another corner who's one of my favorite players in this draft, but is a QB baiter. And what I mean by that, they trust their instincts enough and their technique enough where they can kind of flirt with the quarterback and say, hey, Mr. Quarterback, why don't you throw it in this area because there's a little bit of cushion, and let's see if I can make a play on it. Bunting has that type of ability where he can explode from his lower body and make a play on the football. I think he's one of the better ball skill guys among the defensive backs in this class, and I just love his route recognition skills. So he's a guy that I think that top 40, top 50 talk is definitely justifiable when you turn on his tape.
Well, the funny thing is you're like the first guy that made me aware of who he is. There's two players that you have brought me onto in this draft process: Sean Bunting from Central and Jalen Ferguson of Louisiana Tech. And I know he's one of your favorite guys as well. We don't want to get into him because of the 3-cone drill, but like you have a natural eye for just good talent. And Sean Bunting is definitely turning the heads of a lot of guys. A player that I like, and this is a pretty common one, but I just feel like he does not get talked about enough. He did get mocked to the Tennessee Titans from Bucky Brooks, I believe, this earlier today. The Tennessee Titans with the 19th pick selected him. Christian Wilkins out of Clemson. He just seems to get somewhat stuck in the middle of all of this because you have Rashawn Gary, you have Quinnen Williams, you have Ed Oliver, you have Cleveland Farrell, you have who's the other Clemson player, you have Dexter Lawrence, the other Clemson player, you have Austin Bryant, the other Clemson player on the defensive line. You have Nick Bosa. We all know about these edge rushers and defensive tackles. Brian Burns, just a handful of players. But Christian Wilkins, I think, is a sure first-rounder, and he checked in at 6'3", 315. I think he ran a solid time of 5.04 seconds. He had 28 reps in the bench. But keep in mind, like, just not even from that athletic standpoint, he had 14 tackles for loss this past year alone. But in his career, he had 192 tackles, 40.5 tackles for loss, 16 sacks. And he did have 15 pass deflections in the course of his career over 4 years. He's a two-time or three-time national champion, a team captain. Like, he fits everything that you're looking for, I think, in a versatile defensive lineman that can play on the interior, whether he's playing as a 1 technique, a 3 technique, a 2-eye, whatever you want to call it. He can play in a variety of spots. He's got an explosive first step. And I love his disruptiveness. He's just always disruptive. He's got really good block recognition. Now, there's times where he, I think, struggles a little bit to, like, hold his ground. And with that point of attack and things like that, I think he struggles a little bit. But overall, he's just a clean player. And I think he's plug-and-play type of player from day one. I think Tennessee at 19 is a real shot of taking him. And I bring them up because you are a fan of them. How would you feel about Christian Wilkins?
Oh, it'd be awesome. When I see the mock draft picks for Christian Wilkins, it makes so much sense. And Wilkins showed his overall ability. I think he really showed his ceiling in that game versus Alabama in the national championship. Sure, he's not over here. He finished like with half a sack, a handful of tackles. But the impact he has on the backfield, if he can get shoulder square and in the appropriate pad level, the dude's merely unblockable. I mean, that's the kind of impact he can add from the interior. He shows a little bit of pass rushing ability. He has some athleticism there. But the guy, if he's determined to make the play on the back or make a play on the ball in the backfield, the guy's going to get it done. He is that kind of player, and I'm glad he definitely showed that in his final game versus Alabama.
And you know what? This might be a hot take for some people, and like I have Ed Oliver as a top 3 player on my board. Ed Oliver's up there. A lot of it's because of just his athletic ability, and I think his first step and his burst is just unteachable and everything else. But like Christian Wilkins, not that far off, to be honest. And from a production standpoint, still not that far off. So like I'm not saying like that's 1A, 1B type of thing, but like if you have Ed Oliver at 5 on your board, probably sitting there around 11, 12, maybe 13 should be Christian Wilkins. I don't think the gap is – it's not like Ed Oliver's the 5th best player in the class and Christian Wilkins the 35th best player in the class. I think like it's a pretty good gap in between there. And then you've got some edge rushers, some linebackers, and some offensive linemen just kind of splitting up the grades a little bit. That's how your board should work, in my opinion. But another player as well that just I don't think is getting talked about either is Dexter Lawrence out of Clemson. Now, I know Mel Kiper has him mocked in his first round, but like I don't like from the combine, we all heard about all these, the 40 times and this, that. Dexter Lawrence, 6'4", 342, almost 35-inch arms, which is insane. And with that, he had 36 reps in the bench, ran a 5.05, and then just like he's so unblockable. Like there's guys that he's just moving literally like physically out of the way, and people can't like touch him. I wish he was more of like a pass rusher at times, like a Christian Wilkins or Ed Oliver, but I think just plugging gaps and stopping the run, he's like a day one, also plug and play guy. Now I'm curious, can he stay healthy? He had a minor quad injury at the combine. There was the whole PED thing or suspension around the national championship, so that kind of sucked. But I think overall this guy could be a sneaky late first-round pick and be, I think, really productive for whoever decides to take him. Maybe it's the Patriots. Maybe it's the Raiders with one of their 24th or 27th pick. Who knows? Maybe it's even like a team like the Los Angeles Chargers or something. What are your thoughts on Dexter Lawrence?
When I break down my players and I have a list of like 200, I like to just like put like 2 to 3 words for each player just to kind of like have fun with it. If somebody asks me about them, I can just say those 3 words and it really describes them. Of course, we'll dig a little deeper as well. But for Dexter Lawrence, it's simply just powerful and unmovable because you cannot, once this guy gets his hands on you, it is game over because the guy will knock you over. He'll roll his hips into you. He'll eat up plenty of space. He can eat up double teams. If you put him over the center, that's probably, I mean, you're going to have to double team him or he's going to create instant separation or instant pressure in the backfield. So he's a guy, definitely just those descriptions, unmovable and power. And the anchor that he shows from a defensive lineman and his ability to really outmatch any single player on the offensive line. I don't care who the opponent is. He's going to get it done, and he is so fun to watch at the point of attack.
Yeah, and I like him a lot. Who's another player that you really like?
Let's just stick on the defensive line since the class is so loaded. And you were talking about Ed Oliver, Christian Wilkins, and Quinnen Williams, just those athletic, high-motor guys. Jeffrey Simmons is another guy that fits right in the bill there, defensive lineman out of Mississippi State. I won't touch on him too much because we did kind of talk about him a little bit last week, talking about his ACL and some of the background issues that he's had with some domestic disputes. But it seems like a lot of that is cleared up right now. A lot of things are not necessarily covered up at Mississippi State, but they kind of came to fruition when he was really considered for a high draft spot. But Mississippi State has had very high praise for him. And so it seems like a lot of that stuff is definitely in his past. But when you turn on the tape for Jeffrey Simmons, you get a high motor guy with tremendous athleticism, the ability to shed and recognize really the whole package in a defensive tackle. I know he only finished with a couple sacks this year, but I think his dynamic athleticism, and they could put him in situations to rush the passer from the interior. But the guy has a nose for the football. He will take on double teams and sometimes even make the tackle after the double teams, not only just carrying those guys and opening things up for guys like Montez Sweat or Gary Green on the defensive end positions, but sometimes, like Ed Oliver, he will not only get double teamed, but he will make the stop on the play with the tackle. So Jeffrey Simmons, a guy that checks the boxes, pretty much everything you want from a defensive tackle. Now off the field, like you said, the knee injury, some domestic violence issues, but I think if the recovery goes well with the ACL, I still think he's a first-round pick, a top 20 pick. And he's a guy that if Nick Bosa and Quinnen Williams aren't in this draft class, to me, I think he's the best prospect in here.
Well, you know what's funny too is like if he did tear his ACL, like if those guys weren't in this class, Quinnen Williams and Bosa, I think he'd still be getting talked about as a top 5 pick. I really do. Even with the torn ACL, I mean, he's already off his crutches and everything else. Like, so he's starting to show movement and the growth and the ability to move around. Now, obviously, he might be a little bit different on the field, but like, he's a top 5 player in this class, and there's no reason to believe that you wouldn't want to draft this guy. I think, like I mentioned, the Chargers with Dexter Lawrence, I think if he's on the board, I think he'd be a great fit there too. I know they have Justin Jones, who was a player I really liked last year out of NC State, but I think Simmons or Lawrence would be definitely an upgrade, and I think it would make for that interior defensive line to get that much better with Joey Bosa, with Melvin Ingram, and then you add in Brandon Mabine, and then you add in whether it's Dexter Lawrence or Jeffrey Simmons or something. That's something. Well, and then you have the Indianapolis Colts as well. I liked them a lot for Charles Omenu, but I can get into that another time. But I think a player that we mutually like, and maybe we can touch base a little bit about him, is Hakeem Butler from Iowa State. Just everything about him speaks the growth to be a number 1 receiver. I mean, he's got the length, he's got the ability just to go up and pluck the ball out of the sky. The wingspan is there. I know there was times that he struggled with drops, but like when I talked to PJ Locke 2 weeks ago, he told me that he was the toughest receiver he ever matched up against. And he said his favorite thing to do is to match up in man coverage, man-to-man with receivers because he likes the physicality. Well, when he matched up in man-to-man coverage against Hakeem Butler, and granted Hakeem Butler's like 6'6" and PJ Locke's 5'10", but like he thought for sure there were times that he was going to intercept the ball, and in the process, Hakeem Butler was just so strong and so overpowering and so hard to cover that he literally just took the ball right out of his hands. And it's just like that's stuff that you can't teach. That's a guy that wants it more than you, and that's a player that I want on my team because I think there's 2 receivers in this draft that have the potential to be a true number one. And when I say true number one, I mean Julio Jones, AJ Green, Antonio Brown, DeAndre Hopkins, guys like that. And I think it's DK Metcalf, and I do think it's Hakeem Butler. Metcalf scares me a little bit with the agilities, the injuries as well, but overall, like he's too good. But Hakeem Butler is just as good too, and I think he's phenomenal. What are your thoughts on him?
Yeah, I mean, I'm going to mirror exactly what you said. A big physical freak, and I think he definitely fits that freak mold, like a DK Metcalf, a guy that just I wrote down in his report. One of the first things I wrote down was the my ball mentality. If he wants the ball, he's going to get the ball. It doesn't matter if you're playing a 7'10" cornerback. If Hakeem Butler wants it, he's going to come down with it. Now, again, you talked about he does struggle with some drops. It seems like it's fixable, and I don't know if it's more of a concentration thing or because I didn't necessarily
think
it was like did you think it was more of like a catching technique or what?
I think it's more so who's throwing the damn ball. To be honest,
yeah, watching him adjust, and it kind of helped him in a sense, but watching him adjust the ball is very impressive. But it's just like even like the lack of spirals or the lack of location just puts him in a
And like he's at times just in a really awkward position sometimes to catch passes. Like there was a game, who the hell was it against? Was it Texas? I think it was Texas, where he legit just hawked up in the sky and grabbed it with one hand. I mean, like those are things that you can't teach, and like that he still came down with that. If he had true hand issues, I think like you wouldn't be attempting one-handed catches. You wouldn't be doing those types of things. And he's got way too many, I think, highlight reel absurd catches for it to be like, okay, this guy's got really bad like drop issues. I think it's more so on quarterback play.
Yeah, I definitely think so too, which again kind of showcases his overall ability. His like ball tracking ability, his ability to really stop and start and attack the football, and then showing his overall ability to break tackles. There was a couple plays, I think versus Kansas and Oklahoma, which described the play that you were talking about, where he had to come back to the football, made the contested catch, then threw the DB off of him, and then scores a touchdown. So the guy really has a total package from a physical standpoint, a guy that you want in the red zone. And I took Lance Zierlein had this stat on NFL.com. Hakeem Butler had 8 touchdowns of at least 40 yards over the past 2 years, which he's a guy that's not known as a burner. He's a long strider. He can eat up a lot of ground, but I know he struggles with some short area quickness. The guy can test you at any level of the field. And I agree with you. He kind of has that wide receiver one quality. And I think if he had more consistent hands, I think he would be pushing some top 25 talks. Now, I don't know really where his draft projection is right now. I mean, it's going to be somewhere probably in the top 40, top 50. But I definitely think if a team likes him enough, I'm not buying this hype of Hollywood Brown going in the first round or some of these other guys. But guys like DK Metcalf, maybe A.J. Brown, I think you slip Hakeem Butler and right behind him that kind of carry that same mold.
Yeah, I mean, I've got Butler at 23 on my big board. That's the final grade. That's where he's going to end up. So, like,
I love that spot for him.
I think that's like, do I have him ranked higher compared to some other players? Yeah, there's some players in front of him or behind him, I should say. But like DK Metcalf sitting there at 17 and 6 spots down is Hakeem Butler. So I really don't think there's that much of a difference. So I like Butler a lot. Who's another guy that you got?
Yeah, we'll flip things. We'll go to the offensive line. If you've been listening to this podcast long enough, you know that I love the trenches. And it's just – I just love that physical play. Like the guys are paddling every single spot or every single snap. And this is a guy that battles every single snap. That's Dalton Reisner. I'm just going to say the offensive lineman from Kansas State. He shifted around over his career and dominated. An all Big 12 offensive lineman throughout the entirety of his career, dominated the Senior Bowl, plays with a nasty demeanor, and the guy has a killer anchor. I think maybe the best. I'll just go out and say it, the best anchor in this entire class. I know you can throw like Bradbury in there from North Carolina State, and maybe a couple like the center from Texas A&M, Eric McCoy, I think is another guy that embodies that. But the guy has an incredible anchor. It only takes him maybe at most one step back to really recover and exert that power back into the defender. But the guy is not faced by any upper body movement. You're talking about Charles Omenihu, the defensive lineman from Texas. That is a great game to watch between the two because Dalton Reisner really sits there and stagnates anything Omenihu. Omenihu gets a little bit of pressure. I'm not going to sit here and dog him, but Dalton Reisner really puts him in check. Off the edge, whether it's the inside move, quickness, overall length, flexibility. Dalton Reisner has a plan to match anything that is thrown his way, and he's just a road grader in the run game. He's a guy that I know I say this, and I probably need to stop saying it because it sounds cliche, but you talk about a guy that checks all the boxes of what you look for at a certain position. It's hard to find really a glaring weakness for Dalton Reisner for a reason not to pick him in the top 20 if you need some offensive line help.
Yeah, I'm with you. I think there's a lot to like with Dalton Reisner. I think he's a player that there were times against Montez Sweat, he struggled a little bit, but Montez Sweat, as we know, maybe the most athletic edge rusher in this class off of just the combine in itself. But like, he's a football player. Like, I love him as a right tackle. I know he's got the experience inside, but I think he's just a player that, hey, you know what? You put him at right tackle, let him go there and see what happens. But also off the field, like, he's just a great guy. He's got his Reisner Up Foundation, which is a foundation for kids, which actually, cool story, recently followed me on Twitter. And like, I'm definitely going to donate, things and money and everything to this foundation because I know it's going to a good cause. And I'm hoping I can actually get touch base with Dalton and hopefully get him on the show to talk more about it. But just like, I love him, dude. He's probably one player in this draft that has grown on me more than anybody because like, I remember telling you this 2 games through his tape. It was like, I don't know, man. I don't really see what the buzz is. And then you watch more and more and you get to like 6-7 games and you're like, okay, this guy has it. So like I saw like the 2 probably worst games first, which was one against Mississippi State. And then you go and you watch games like against Texas, you watch him against Oklahoma State, you watch these games and you're like, okay, this guy, he's legit. He's good. And I think like you said, any team that needs a player like him is stupid if they pass on him. Like the Houston Texans at 23, if they don't take him, if he's on the board, they're idiots, just absolute idiots because he would, one, be a terrific fit there, but also just like, you need offensive line help. So I think any team that needs offensive line help would be just asinine to not take him. I also think a team that would pass on the player I'm going to bring up is Darrell Henderson from Memphis. I love him. I think he's phenomenal. I have him as my RB3. I don't have him ahead of Josh Jacobs or David Montgomery, but I do like Henderson a lot. He ran a 4.49 in the 40, similar in a sense to Dalvin Cook in a way with like the athletic ability from where he tested, but just on the field, he is, I think, a totally different player, and he is maybe one of the most electric, one of the best home run hitters for running backs in this class. I know Bills fans have been wanting another running back. I don't know if you're getting that in this draft because you still have Shady. You now signed Frank Gore, but if you're looking for like a player like Henderson, it wouldn't surprise me, and I told you this yesterday, it wouldn't surprise me if he was the first running back off the board. It really wouldn't because he averaged close to 9 yards per carry or something like that over his last 350 attempts, if I remember correctly. He's got really good contact balance. Again, explosive, just like one cut, go, and he's gone, like in a flash. And so when I saw that 4.49, like, yeah, I was a little disappointed. It's fast. But at the same time, I was a little disappointed because I was like, I thought he was going to be like a 4.35 guy, but he is certainly just one of my favorite backs in this class. Do you have any thoughts on Henderson? Have you watched him enough, or do you have another player outside of that?
Yeah, I didn't realize. I was just looking up his profile on NFL.com and just seeing some of the results, but I didn't realize this was the comparison that they had with him. But immediately when you turn on the film, he looks like Tevin Coleman at Indiana. That is the exact, almost same mold to me, because you talk about home run hitter, ability to get north to south quick, and just a decisive runner, but patient, and the ability just to see everything open up in front of him. I think those guys are almost mirror images of each other. And Tevin Coleman's a guy that has made a pretty solid career so far in the NFL. And I think Darrell Henderson could do the same thing. And it would not surprise me because running backs, it's just like pick your flavor. If you don't, okay, I'll use this example. If you like light beer or if you like IPAs, you're going to pick which one that you like the best. That's what you're going to go spend your $10.99 on at the grocery store. So
you leave my personal preference out of this podcast.
No, I'm not. We have to get there at some point. We started with basketball, so I'm going to finish with beer. But it's whatever flavor you want, that's what you're going to go put your money toward. So I think that's kind of the same mold that you take over the running backs. So if you're looking at a guy like a downhill runner like Montgomery or Jacobs, or maybe a speedster guy that has a little bit physicality as well, I think you look more towards Darrell Henderson than you do some of those more traditional power backs, so to speak, with some athleticism.
Yeah, no, he's really good. And a linebacker, we haven't really touched base on all these guys. Again, we know Devin White, Devin Bush. You can have him as LB1, LB2, respectively. But Blake Cashman, a player that I think I talked briefly about, but just what an interesting story this guy's got. He's a former walk-on, went to Minnesota, checked all the boxes, earned his way onto the field. And then he just tested out of his mind, ran a 4.5 40, had a 6.95 three-cone drill, broad jump, 124 inches, just freakish athletic ability. I love him as kind of an outside linebacker more so than a middle linebacker, but at 6'1", 237. I don't think this guy's going – he might go in the top 50. I don't think he will. I still think he's probably a late second, early third. Because Mack Wilson still is there. I like Mack Wilson. I think it'll be a toss-up between those two. But Blake Cashman, if your team needs a linebacker, I think he's a fit. I think he's going to be a guy that in 2-3 years he's going to be a team captain. I think almost like similar to Chris Borland from Wisconsin. Like that is exactly who I think of every single time I watch him and every single time I think of like his success. Granted, Borland only played 1 year, but I think like Cashman for the next 7-8 years is going to be a really good player at the next level.
Yeah, I've only seen snippets of him just scrolling through Twitter from what you had on him. So everybody should definitely go check out your content on Blake Cashman. But, yeah, he's a guy that seems like he's getting a lot of buzz, a lot of athleticism for that linebacker position. And I know, and I don't want to make this sound like, I'm deeming the draft analyst and everything, but he doesn't fall on that typical white linebacker stereotype. He brings a lot more athleticism to the table than what you may expect to see from a guy traditionally a Big Ten linebacker.
Yeah, so like again, I like Cashman a lot. I like Henderson, all the guys we talked about. I think that's pretty much it. I mean, we hit like 8, 9, 10 names there. Do you have any players that you've been watching the last couple of days?
Well, I've actually been focusing more outside of the realm of draft prospects and more on a certain position. Been working on this running back piece for quite a few weeks now, just kind of breaking down some of the rookie success in the NFL from the running back position, going back over the span of, I think I went back to 1995, just kind of tracking those first-round running backs to see the longevity, not only of their whole career, but their longevity with that team that picked them. And it's not too surprising. I mean, we know, the shelf life for running backs is very low. And I know there's some exceptions like LT, Adrian Peterson. You're probably going to see the same thing with like, Saquon Barkley, Zeke Elliott. But still, there's a lot of examples for you to be like, hey, if you believe this guy's a Hall of Fame running back, pick him, because history shows that there are guys like that in the top 10, top 15 that you can really, I don't say mortgage your draft pick for that, but there is, the exception to drafting a running back early, but there's also a reason why that is a term or that is a phrase, because there's a lot of guys that fall flat and don't even spend 2 years with their team. They don't even make it,
right.
6 to 20 games. So there's just some numbers there that people can kind of digest and formulate their own opinions. That should come out sometime this week, hopefully Thursday or Friday morning. And then just breaking down, like I said, from the past 5 years, the production from the rookies compared to the rest of the NFL running backs. So definitely keep an eye out on that on cover1.net.
We will most definitely share that when it is posted and released for everybody to check out. Of course, you can get it firsthand with the Cover One app. All you have to do is find it in your app store, and it's very simple. Just search Cover One, download it, and get those push notifications. And every single time you need something to read, it will pop up right then and there on your handheld device, however you go about your business. Like very soon, I'll be posting this podcast up. You will get a push notification when it's posted, and you can listen right away. So, like, it is the best app, I think, for what we all do. It's up there as one of the best apps out there, if not the best app. I think from a content perspective and just the consistency of good content, I think it's phenomenal. I know that article on the running backs is going to be great. You guys, of course, like I said, can check that out on the Cover One app or at cover1.net, or you can just simply smash the follow button at Russ NFL Draft for me or at _Christian Page. CP, my man, we will talk some more later this weekend, of course, with our teams in the Final Four. Best of luck to your Auburn Tigers.
Same to you.
Thank you, my friend. And everybody else, you guys enjoy the rest of your week. There will be more content coming. I promise you that. More guests on the show, just like we had Emery Hunt yesterday. CP will be joining me next week as well, and I'll bring JR on to talk his draft guide. Tons of stuff is happening, my friends. It's April. We are here. It's live in the flesh. So we will be back next week with CP talking the draft. Until then, we've got you covered right here on Cover One, the NFL Draft Podcast.